Dying woman collapses in the snow, begging a stranger to save her newborn baby. But this isn't a story about mercy. The woman who opens that door recognizes the girl immediately, and in that frozen moment, she faces an impossible choice. Let an innocent child die in the cold, or save the granddaughter of the man who killed her son. What she decides will be far more cruel than death itself. For 12 years, a child will grow up in a house where every meal comes wrapped in hatred, where kindness is a weapon, and where love is the cruelest lie ever told. She'll spend her childhood trying to earn affection from a woman who saved her life for one reason only: revenge. And when the truth finally comes to light, it will shatter everything she thought she knew about mercy, justice, and the price of surviving someone else's grief. This is the story of a woman who chose to keep a child alive not out of compassion, but to own her, to control her, to make her pay every single day for sins committed before she was even born. And when that child finally learns why she was never loved, she'll have to decide: does she become another victim of this cycle of pain? Or does she find the strength to break it before it destroys what's left of her soul? The woman's knuckles were white against the oak door, each knock weaker than the last. Blood seeped through the threadbare fabric wrapped around her feet, leaving crimson prints in the fresh snow that had begun to fall harder now, erasing her tracks as if the world itself wanted to forget she'd ever existed. Inside the modest stone cottage, Brigitte froze with her hand suspended over the iron pot, the wooden spoon dripping broth back into the simmering liquid. That sound, that desperate, dying sound of someone who had nothing left but the strength for 3 more knocks. She knew that sound. She'd made it herself 2 years ago, beating her fists against the magistrate's door, begging him to investigate her son's death. Properly, to see it wasn't an accident but negligence, to make someone pay for the fact that her 12-year-old boy would never come home again. The magistrate had turned her away. The world had turned her away, and she'd learned that some doors stay closed no matter how hard you knock. But this knocking, this was different. This was the sound of someone who wouldn't survive to knock on another door. Brigitte's jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached. She wiped her hands on her apron with slow, deliberate movements, each swipe buying her another second to decide whether to be the kind of person who opened doors or the kind who let them stay closed. Her husband had been dead for 5 years. Her youngest son, William, had been in the ground for 2. Her eldest, Thomas, was 14 now and sleeping upstairs, probably dreaming of the brother he'd watched die in a field that wasn't even theirs, crushed beneath a horse that bolted because some careless farmer didn't secure his fence properly. That farmer, Gregor, he'd paid nothing, offered nothing, said boys shouldn't play near working fields, as if William had been playing, as if her son hadn't been trying to help retrieve a tool Gregor himself had left behind. The knocking stopped. Brigitte's breath caught. In the silence, she heard something worse than knocking. A voice, broken, desperate. "Please, not for me, for her. Please, her." Brigitte moved to the door before she decided to move, her body acting on some instinct. Older than grief, older than rage. She lifted the iron latch and pulled the door open, and the winter wind hit her face like a slap, carrying with it the smell of blood and milk and something else. Desperation has a smell. It's sharp and sour, and it fills your nose like smoke. The woman on her doorstep was barely more than a girl, 16, maybe 17. Her face was gray, lips blue, eyes glassy with fever or cold or both. She wore a dress that had once been decent but was now soaked through, clinging to a body that had recently given birth and was now giving up. In her arms, wrapped in what looked like a man's shirt, was a bundle that moved. A baby. The girl's eyes found Brigitte's, and in them was a recognition that made Brigitte's stomach twist. This girl knew her, knew who she was, knew what she was asking. "I'm Aelith," the girl whispered, and the name hit Brigitte like a fist to the throat. Aelith, Gregor's daughter. The farmer who'd killed her son had a daughter, and that daughter was dying on her doorstep holding a baby. Aelith's legs buckled. She fell forward and Brigitte caught her without thinking, her arms wrapping around the girl and the bundle both. The baby squirmed against her chest, and the sensation was so foreign, so achingly familiar, that for a moment Brigitte couldn't breathe. She hadn't held an infant since Thomas was born 14 years ago. Hadn't wanted to, hadn't been able to bear it. "My father," Aelith gasped, her breath hot and rank, against Brigitte's neck. "He doesn't know. Sent me away, said I shamed him. The baby's father was a merchant's son, passing through. He's gone. They're all gone. I have no one. I've been walking for 3 days. Please." Brigitte lowered the girl to the floor just inside the door, the cold wind still howling in, snow beginning to collect on the threshold. Aelith's grip on the baby loosened, and Brigitte found herself taking the bundle, pulling it against her chest. The shirt fell away slightly, revealing a tiny face, red and wrinkled, eyes closed, mouth working in sleep. A girl, maybe 2 weeks old, maybe less. "She hasn't eaten since yesterday morning," Aelith said, her voice fading. "I have no milk left, nothing left. I knew you'd be the only one who might. Because you know what it is to lose." Brigitte's hands trembled. She looked down at the baby in her arms, so small, so vulnerable, so completely innocent of everything her grandfather had done. This child hadn't killed William. This child hadn't even existed when William died. This child was just a baby who needed food and warmth and someone to keep her alive through the night. But this baby was also Gregor's blood, the man who'd shrugged when they'd brought William's broken body home, the man who'd said accidents happen, the man who'd paid the church for a quick burial and thought that settled things. Aelith's hand reached up, fingers brushing the baby's cheek one last time. "Her name is..." "I was going to call her." Her eyes fluttered. "It doesn't matter. You'll give her a better one. Thank you. Thank you for not letting her die alone in the cold." The girl's hand fell. Her chest rose once more, shallow and rattling, then stopped. Brigitte stood there, holding a dead girl's baby. Snow blowing in through the open door, her own breath visible in small clouds that dissipated as quickly as they formed. The baby stirred, made a small sound. Not quite a cry, just a noise that said, "I'm here. I'm hungry. I'm cold. I'm alive." Upstairs, she heard Thomas's footsteps. He'd be down any second, wondering why his mother was standing in the cold with the door wide open. He'd see the body. He'd see the baby. He'd have questions, and Brigitte would have to decide right now, in this moment, whether she was the kind of woman who saved the granddaughter of the man who'd killed her son, or whether she was the kind of woman who closed the door and let winter do what winter does best. The baby opened her eyes. They were dark blue, unfocused, searching for something. Warmth. Milk. A mother who was already gone. Brigitte looked at those eyes, and something cracked open inside her chest. Not her heart. Something deeper. Darker. A place where grief and rage had been fermenting for 2 years, turning into something else. Something that tasted like possibility. She could let this baby die. No one would know. Aelith had died on her doorstep, a tragedy, a shame, but not Brigitte's fault. Or she could keep her. Thomas stood at the bottom of the stairs, his 14-year-old frame casting a long shadow in the firelight, and stared at the scene before him with the kind of stillness that comes right before something inside you breaks. His mother held a baby. There was a dead woman on the floor. Snow was piling up inside the doorway, and his mother's face looked like someone had carved it from the same stone as the cottage walls. "Mother?" His voice cracked on the word, the way it had been doing lately, caught somewhere between the boy he'd been and the man everyone expected him to become too soon. Brigitte didn't answer immediately. She stood there, the baby pressed against her chest, her eyes fixed on something Thomas couldn't see. Something beyond the walls, beyond the night, beyond the present moment entirely. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, bloodless, and her breathing came in short, controlled bursts through her nose. Thomas had seen that look before. 2 years ago, when they'd told her William was dead. That terrible frozen calm that meant his mother had gone somewhere inside herself where no one could follow. "Close the door," she said finally, her voice flat, "and help me move her." Thomas moved on instinct, pushing the heavy door closed against the wind, the iron latch falling into place with a sound like finality. The cottage suddenly felt smaller, warmer, suffocating. He turned back to the body, his stomach churning. He'd seen death before. William's death. But that had been different. That had been his brother. Someone he knew. Someone whose face he'd memorized and whose absence had left a hole in the world shaped exactly like a 12-year-old boy who laughed too loud and climbed too high and died too young. This girl was a stranger. Except she wasn't, was she? Thomas moved closer, his feet heavy on the wooden floor, and looked at her face properly. Even in death, even gray and still, there was something familiar about the slope of her nose, the shape of her jaw. His mind worked backward, sorting through memories of market days and church gatherings, until it landed on a name and a face he'd tried to forget. "That's Gregor's daughter," he whispered, and the words felt like a betrayal just speaking them aloud. "Aelith. That's Aelith." His mother's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. "I know who she is. But why? How did she?" Thomas couldn't finish the questions. They piled up in his throat, choking him. He looked at the baby instead, at the tiny thing making small, helpless movements against his mother's chest. "Is that her baby?" "It was," Brigitte said, and something in the way she emphasized that word made Thomas's skin prickle. "Now it's no one's, or it's ours. I haven't decided yet." Thomas felt something cold slide down his spine that had nothing to do with the winter air still clinging to his nightshirt. "What do you mean, ours?" Brigitte finally looked at him, and Thomas had to fight the urge to step back. His mother's eyes were different, harder, like she'd made some decision in the minutes before he'd come downstairs, and that decision had changed something fundamental about who she was. Or maybe it had just revealed who she'd been all along, hidden beneath the grief and the daily routines of survival. "She came here to die," Brigitte said slowly, as if explaining something to a small child. "She gave me the baby and died. No one knows she came here. No one knows this baby exists, except us. Gregor sent her away months ago, probably when he realized she was pregnant and unmarried. A shame to the family. That's what he'd call it. A shame." She laughed, but it wasn't a sound that meant anything good. As if that man knows anything about shame. Thomas's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He knew where his mother was going with this. He could see it forming in the air between them like smoke, dark and choking. "Mother, we can't just... can't..." "What?" Brigitte interrupted, her voice sharp now, cutting. "Can't take in an orphaned baby. Can't show mercy to an innocent child. That's what we'd be doing, Thomas. That's what anyone who asks would see. A widow and her son, taking in a poor baby whose mother died in childbirth. How Christian, how good of us. But it's not mercy," Thomas said, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Is it? It's not mercy at all." The baby chose that moment to cry. Not a full wail, just a weak, mewling sound that spoke of hunger and cold and need. Brigitte looked down at the bundle in her arms, and her face softened for just a moment. Just long enough for Thomas to see the battle happening behind his mother's eyes. Then the softness vanished, replaced by that terrible, frozen calm again. "Go upstairs and get the old blankets from the chest," Brigitte ordered. "The ones we used to wrap William in when he was small. And bring down the basket we kept his clothes in. It should still be in the corner of my room." Thomas didn't move. He couldn't. His feet felt rooted to the floor, his whole body rebelling against what was happening. "We should take her to the church. Father Benedict would find someone to..." "To what?" Brigitte's voice rose now, angry, raw. "To raise Gregor's grandchild? To give her to some family who will treat her well, love her, make sure she grows up happy and safe, while William is in the ground, while his killer walks free, tends his farm, profits from the land where my son died. She shook her head violently. No, no, Thomas. This baby is mine now. Mine to keep, mine to raise however I see fit. And if that makes me cruel, if that makes me monstrous, then so be it. I've earned the right to be a monster. The words hung in the air between them, and Thomas felt something shift in his understanding of his mother, of their life together, of everything he'd thought he knew about right and wrong. He'd watched his brother die. He'd stood there, 14 years old, and watched William's eyes go glassy and empty, while Gregor shouted about his spooked horse and how boys shouldn't play in fields and how accidents happen. He'd felt rage then, hot and consuming. He'd wanted Gregor to hurt the way they hurt. But this was different. This was calculated. This was choosing to take an innocent life and twist it into some kind of weapon, some kind of payment for a debt that could never actually be settled. She's just a baby, Thomas said quietly. She didn't kill William. She wasn't even born when he died. I know, Brigitte replied, and her voice was steady now, terrifyingly steady. But she's all I have. She's the only piece of Gregor I can reach, the only piece I can control. And maybe that makes me no better than him. Maybe it makes me worse. But I don't care anymore, Thomas. I'm tired of being good. I'm tired of turning the other cheek. I'm tired of watching bad men prosper while good children die. She walked past him, carrying the baby toward the fire, and Thomas watched her settle into the rocking chair that had been his grandmother's, the one his mother used to sit in with William when he was small, singing him songs about knights and dragons and happy endings. The baby's cries had subsided to small whimpers. Brigitte began to rock, the chair creaking in rhythm, and Thomas realized with a jolt that she was humming. The same song. The same lullaby she'd sung to William. Behind him, Aelith's body lay cooling on the floor, her open eyes, reflecting the firelight like empty windows. And Thomas understood, with a clarity that felt like drowning, that his mother had just made a choice that would poison all three of their lives for years to come. The baby would grow up in this house, never knowing she was living with the woman whose son her grandfather had killed. Never knowing that every meal, every blanket, every moment of shelter came wrapped in hatred disguised as charity. It was the cruelest mercy Thomas had ever witnessed. 3 years had passed since the night Aelith died on their doorstep, and the cottage had learned to hold secrets the way stone holds cold. The baby had become a child. Her name was Rose, though Brigitte had chosen it with the kind of deliberate irony that made Thomas's stomach turn every time he heard his mother say it. Something beautiful with thorns. Something that looked innocent but could draw blood if you weren't careful. Thomas was 17 now, his shoulders broader, his voice settled into the deep register of manhood, but his eyes carried a weight that made him look older, much older. He'd spent 3 years watching his mother perform the most elaborate act of revenge he could have imagined, and the worst part was that no one else could see it. To the village, to Father Benedict, to the occasional merchant who passed through, Brigitte was a saint. A childless widow who'd taken in an orphan and raised her as her own. How generous, how selfless, how good. But Thomas saw the truth in the small moments. The way his mother's jaw tightened when Rose laughed too loud. The way she served the child's portions just slightly smaller than necessary. Not enough to be obvious, but enough that Rose was always a little hungry, always a little smaller than other children her age. The way Brigitte praised Rose's work only when others were watching, and the way her voice turned cold and flat when they were alone. Rose was 3 years old now, old enough to talk, to ask questions, to seek affection with the blind trust of a child who didn't yet understand that love could have conditions. She followed Brigitte around the cottage like a shadow, her small hands always reaching, always trying to help, always hoping for a smile that never quite reached her mother's eyes. Thomas watched it all and said nothing, and his silence made him complicit. It was a Thursday morning in early spring when everything began to crack. Thomas had been out checking the sheep in the lower pasture, and when he returned to the cottage, he found Rose sitting on the floor near the hearth, tears streaming down her face, her small shoulders shaking. Brigitte stood at the table kneading bread with violent efficiency, her hands working the dough as if she were trying to punish it. "What happened?" Thomas asked, setting down the bucket of water he'd carried from the well. Brigitte didn't look up. "She broke a bowl, the good one, the one that was my mother's. Clumsy, careless child." Thomas looked at Rose, at her red-rimmed eyes and trembling lip, and something in his chest constricted. The bowl in question lay in pieces near the hearth. It had been old, yes, and perhaps valuable for sentimental reasons, but it was just a bowl. Just clay and glaze. Nothing worth the look of devastation on Rose's small face. "It was an accident," Thomas said carefully. "She's 3. Children drop things. Children need to learn," Brigitte replied. Her voice clipped. "If she's going to live under this roof, she needs to understand that actions have consequences. She needs to learn to be careful, to pay attention, to not be thoughtless and reckless like—" She stopped herself, but Thomas heard the words she didn't say. Like Gregor, like her grandfather, like the man who didn't secure his fence and let a horse run wild. Rose looked up at Thomas with eyes that were too large for her thin face, brown eyes that reminded him uncomfortably of William's, though they had no blood relation. Maybe all children's eyes held that same quality of desperate hope, that same need to believe the world was safe and the people in it were kind. "I'm sorry," Rose whispered, her voice small and broken. "I was trying to help. I wanted to wash it for Mama. I wanted to be good." The word Mama made Brigitte's hands still on the dough. She stood there frozen, her knuckles white with flour, and Thomas saw something flicker across her face. Pain, maybe, or guilt, or anger at feeling guilt. Then it was gone, replaced by that carefully controlled blankness she'd perfected over the years. "Go to the corner," Brigitte said quietly. "Sit there until I tell you to move, and think about being more careful." Rose scrambled to her feet, still crying silently, and made her way to the corner of the room where Thomas knew she'd sit for hours if Brigitte decided to forget about her. It had happened before. The child would sit there, perfectly still, barely breathing, while Brigitte went about her chores, as if Rose didn't exist. Sometimes Thomas would sneak her bread when his mother wasn't looking. Sometimes he'd mouth words of comfort across the room. But he never openly defied Brigitte, never stood between his mother and her chosen target, because he was a coward. He knew that now, had known it since the night Aelith died. After Rose had been sitting for what must have been 2 hours, Thomas couldn't stand it anymore. He approached his mother, who was now sitting at the spinning wheel, her hands moving with mechanical precision. "Mother," he said quietly, "she's been there long enough. She's learned her lesson." Brigitte's hands didn't stop moving. "Have you forgotten, Thomas? Have you forgotten what we lost? What that family took from us?" "I haven't forgotten William," Thomas said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "I think about him every day. I see him every time I close my eyes. But she—" He gestured toward Rose, who sat so still in the corner she might have been a doll. "She isn't Gregor. She isn't responsible for what happened. She's his blood," Brigitte hissed, finally looking up at him. "His granddaughter. And as long as she lives under my roof, eats my food, wears the clothes I provide, she'll know what it means to be in debt to someone. She'll know what it means to owe something that can never be repaid, just like Gregor owes me a son he can never give back." Thomas felt something hot and angry rise in his throat. "So you'll make a child pay? For her grandfather's sins? You'll starve her, humiliate her, break her spirit piece by piece? That's justice to you?" "It's all I have," Brigitte said, and for the first time in 3 years, her voice cracked. Just slightly. Just enough for Thomas to hear the woman his mother used to be, buried somewhere beneath the grief and rage. "It's all I have left, Thomas. If I let her go, if I send her away or treat her kindly, then what was it all for? What did William die for? Nothing. Just bad luck. And a moment's carelessness? I can't accept that. I won't." Thomas looked at his mother, really looked at her, and saw what he'd been trying not to see for 3 years. She was disappearing, not physically, but in every way that mattered. The woman who'd sung lullabies and baked bread with William and laughed at his father's terrible jokes was gone. In her place was this hollow, haunted thing that wore his mother's face and spoke with his mother's voice, but had replaced her heart with something, cold and calculating. And Rose. Rose was growing up in a house where love was conditional, where affection was currency, where every moment of warmth came with an invisible price tag. She was 3 years old and already learning to make herself small, to apologize for existing, to believe that she was fundamentally unworthy of kindness. Thomas walked to the corner where Rose sat. He crouched down in front of her, and her eyes met his with a mixture of fear and hope that made him want to weep. "Come on, little one," he said softly. "Let's go feed the chickens. Would you like that?" Rose glanced past him toward Brigitte, seeking permission with the trained instinct of a child who'd learned that autonomy was not her right. Brigitte gave a single curt nod, and Rose scrambled to her feet, her small hand slipping into Thomas's with a trust that felt like a knife between his ribs. As they walked out into the spring sunshine, Rose looked up at him. "Thomas," she said quietly, "why doesn't Mama like me?" And Thomas realized that at 3 years old, this child already knew, already understood, on some fundamental level, that the woman raising her didn't love her, couldn't love her, had chosen not to love her. "She likes you fine," Thomas lied, and hated himself for it. "She's just sad sometimes, about things that happened before you were born." "What things?" Rose asked, her small face tilted up to his, innocent and trusting and so terribly unaware of the poisoned ground she walked. "On every single day." Thomas swallowed hard. "I'll tell you when you're older," he said, knowing he never would. Knowing that by the time Rose was old enough to understand, the damage would already be done. 7 years had passed since Aleth's body had been buried in the churchyard under a simple wooden cross, and Rose was now 10 years old. 10 years of living in a house where affection was rationed like bread during famine. 10 years of trying to earn love that would never come. 10 years of Brigitte's carefully measured cruelty disguised as discipline, so subtle that even Father Benedict, when he visited, saw nothing amiss. Thomas was 21 now, a man by any measure, with calloused hands and a beard that made him look like his father. But his eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting a losing battle for far too long. He'd watched Rose grow from a helpless infant into a wary, anxious child who flinched at sudden movements and apologized for things that weren't her fault. He'd watched his mother become more skilled at her particular brand of torture, learning exactly how to wound without leaving visible scars. It was in the small things, the way Brigitte assigned Rose the hardest chores, the ones that left the girl's hands raw and bleeding, the way she praised other children in the village while remaining silent about Rose's accomplishments, the way she fed Rose last, and if there wasn't quite enough food, well, the child could go hungry. Growing girls didn't need as much as working men, did they? The way she never, not once in 10 years, had embraced Rose or stroked her hair, or offered comfort when the girl woke crying from nightmares. Rose had learned to survive by becoming invisible. She moved through the cottage like a ghost, speaking only when spoken to, making herself useful in hopes of earning a kind word that never came. She was small for her age, thin in a way that spoke of chronic hunger rather than natural build. Her hair, which should have been thick and lustrous, hung limp around a face that had learned to show no emotion at all. Self-protection through erasure. But Thomas saw the cracks forming. In Rose, yes, but more dangerously, in himself. He was becoming someone he didn't recognize, someone who enabled cruelty through silence, someone who offered small kindnesses to a child while allowing her to be systematically destroyed. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in late summer. Thomas had gone to the village to trade wool, and when he returned, he found Rose in the garden, digging in the dirt with her bare hands. She was crying, but making no sound, tears dripping onto the soil as she worked. Beside her lay the remains of what had been her only possession, a small cloth doll that Thomas had made for her when she was 5. It had been torn to pieces. "Rose," Thomas approached slowly, his heart hammering. What happened? The girl didn't look up. Her hands kept digging, clawing at the earth, with a desperation that made Thomas's throat constrict. I have to bury her, Rose whispered. Mama said she's rubbish. Mama said I'm too old for toys. Mama said I'm useless and lazy and I don't deserve nice things, so I have to bury her properly, like the dead people at church, so she's not just rubbish. Thomas felt something snap inside his chest. He looked toward the cottage and saw Brigitte watching from the window, her face impassive. Their eyes met, and he saw no shame there, no regret. Just that cold, calculating hardness that had replaced everything human in her. He knelt beside Rose, his knees sinking into the soft earth. You don't have to bury her, he said gently. I can fix her. I'll sew her back together tonight, good as new. Rose's hands finally stilled. She looked at him with eyes that were ancient in her young face, eyes that had seen too much disappointment to allow hope. You can't fix everything, Thomas, she said quietly. Some things stay broken. The words hit him like a physical blow. This was a 10-year-old child speaking with the resignation of someone 3 times her age. A child who'd learned that love was a lie, that safety was temporary, that the only person she could rely on was herself, and even that was questionable. Thomas gathered the pieces of the doll, his hands shaking with rage he couldn't direct anywhere useful. Come inside, he said. Let's wash your hands. I can't, Rose replied, and her voice was flat, emotionless. I haven't finished the washing yet. Mama said if I don't finish before supper, I don't eat. And I didn't finish because I was crying about the doll, which was stupid, because Mama's right. I am too old for toys. I should have been working. Thomas stood up, still holding the ruined doll, and walked into the cottage. Brigitte was at the table, peeling turnips with methodical precision. She didn't look up when he entered. Why? Thomas asked, his voice low and dangerous. Why did you destroy her doll? What did that accomplish? What possible purpose did it serve except to break that child's heart? Brigitte's knife stilled against the turnip. She needs to learn that nothing in this world is permanent, that things can be taken away without warning or reason. That loss is a part of life. I'm teaching her resilience. You're teaching her to hate herself. Thomas shot back. You're teaching her that she's worthless, that she doesn't deserve kindness or comfort or even the smallest bit of joy. And for what? Because her grandfather killed William? Because you need someone to punish and Gregor is beyond your reach? Careful, Thomas, Brigitte said quietly, and there was warning in her tone. You've been walking a very thin line for 7 years. Don't cross it now. Or what? Thomas felt something wild and reckless rising in him. You'll treat me the way you treat her. You'll destroy my things and starve me and make me feel like I'm nothing. Mother, look at yourself. Look at what you've become. William would be ashamed. The knife clattered to the table. Brigitte stood so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. Her face had gone white, then red, mottled with rage. Don't you dare, she hissed. Don't you dare speak of William. You don't know what he'd think. You don't know what it's like to lose a child, to have him ripped away because of someone else's carelessness. You were his brother, yes, but I was his mother. I carried him. I birthed him. I raised him. And then I buried him. So, don't you tell me what he'd think of how I choose to survive that. This isn't survival, Thomas said, and his voice cracked. This is slow suicide. You're killing yourself piece by piece, and you're taking Rose down with you. That child has done nothing to you. Nothing. She doesn't even know who Gregor is. She doesn't know why you hate her. She just knows that the woman who's supposed to love her can barely stand to look at her. I saved her life, Brigitte said, and her voice had taken on a trembling quality that Thomas hadn't heard in years. When Aelith died on our doorstep, I could have let that baby freeze. I could have closed the door and pretended I'd never seen her. But I didn't. I took her in. I fed her. I clothed her. I kept her alive. That's more than her grandfather did for William. You saved her so you could torture her, Thomas said flatly. You saved her so you'd have something of Gregor's to control, to punish, to break. That's not mercy, Mother. That's cruelty with extra steps. Brigitte's hand moved before Thomas could react. The slap echoed in the small cottage, sharp and shocking. Thomas's head snapped to the side, his cheek burning. They stood there, frozen, both of them breathing hard. Brigitte's hand was still raised, trembling now, and Thomas saw something flicker in her eyes. Horror, maybe. Realization. Then it was gone, buried beneath that familiar hardness. "Get out," Brigitte whispered. "Get out of my sight." Thomas touched. His burning cheek tasted blood where his teeth had cut his inner lip. He looked at his mother, at this woman who'd once been gentle and kind and full of laughter, and saw a stranger. "Rose needs to eat," he said quietly. "Whether she finishes the washing or not. She needs to eat, Mother. She's 10 years old and I can count her ribs." He walked out before Brigitte could respond, the ruined doll still clutched in his hand. Outside, Rose had finished burying the pieces she'd gathered. She'd made a small cross from twigs, bound together with grass, and planted it at the head of the tiny grave. She was sitting beside it, her dirty hands folded in her lap, lips moving in what might have been a prayer. Thomas sat down beside her, and they stayed there in silence as the sun moved across the sky. After a long while, Rose spoke. "Thomas, do you think there's something wrong with me? Something that makes people not want to love me?" And Thomas, who'd spent 7 years telling small lies to protect this child from a truth too heavy for her to carry, found he couldn't lie anymore. "No, Rose," he said, his voice rough with tears he refused to shed. "There's nothing wrong with you. You're perfect. You're good and kind, and you deserve so much better than this." Rose turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw a question she was too afraid to ask out loud. "If that's true, then why does this keep happening to me?" Thomas had no answer. Only the doll's torn pieces in his hands and the weight of his own cowardice pressing down on his shoulders like stones. Rose was 12 years old when she stopped trying to earn love and started trying simply to survive. 2 years had passed since Thomas had confronted Brigitte about the doll, and things had not improved. If anything, they'd gotten worse in ways that were harder to name. The physical deprivations continued, the cold silences, the impossible standards. But now there was something else, a kind of studied indifference that was somehow more devastating than active cruelty. Brigitte had perfected the art of looking through Rose as if she were made of glass, as if she occupied no space at all. The girl could stand directly in front of her, speaking, asking questions, and Brigitte would simply continue whatever task occupied her hands, her face betraying nothing. Not anger, not irritation, nothing. As if Rose's voice were just another sound in the cottage, no more significant than the crackling of the fire or the wind against the shutters. Thomas was 23 now, and the weight of his complicity had carved lines into his face that made him look a decade older. He'd tried, in his way, to be a buffer between Rose and Brigitte's calculated coldness. He snuck the girl extra food when he could. He taught her to read using his father's old prayer book, lessons conducted in whispers when Brigitte was out tending the garden or visiting the market. He tried to show Rose that not everyone in the world would treat her as if her existence were an inconvenience at best, an offense at worst. But he knew it wasn't enough, could never be enough, because at the end of each day, Rose still slept in the coldest corner of the cottage, still wore clothes that were threadbare and too small, still carried herself with the hunched shoulders of someone expecting a blow at any moment. It was a Wednesday morning in autumn when Rose finally asked the question that had been building inside her for 12 years. Thomas was in the barn, mucking out the stalls, when he heard the door creak open. Rose slipped inside, her thin frame barely creating a shadow in the dim light. She held a bucket that was nearly as big as she was, meant for carrying water from the well. "Thomas?" Her voice was quiet, uncertain. She'd learned long ago that speaking too loudly, demanding too much attention, resulted in punishment. "Can I ask you something?" Thomas straightened, leaning on his pitchfork. His back ached from the work, but he pushed the discomfort aside. Of course, Rose. What is it? The girl set down the bucket, and Thomas noticed her hands were shaking. Not from cold, though the autumn air had a bite to it. From fear. Or maybe the kind of desperate courage it took to finally voice a question you'd been carrying like a stone in your chest. Why does she hate me? Rose asked, and the words came out in a rush, as if she had to say them quickly before she lost her nerve. I've tried everything. I work hard. I don't complain. I stay out of the way. I do everything she asks and more, but it's never enough. She looks at me sometimes like she wishes I'd never been born, like I'm something rotten that she can't get rid of. Why? What did I do that was so terrible? Thomas felt his heart crack open. This was the moment he'd been dreading for 12 years, the moment when Rose would demand the truth, and he'd have to decide whether to give it to her or feed her another comfortable lie. He set down the pitchfork and moved to sit on a hay bale, gesturing for Rose to join him. She did, perching on the edge like a small bird ready to take flight at the first sign of danger. You didn't do anything wrong, Thomas said carefully. You have to understand that first. None of this is your fault. But there has to be a reason, Rose pressed. People don't just hate someone for no reason, especially not someone they raised, especially not someone they saved. Her voice caught on that word, saved, as if the act of being rescued had created a debt she could never repay. She tells people in the village that she took me in when my mother died, that she gave me a home when I had nothing. So why does she treat me like I'm a burden, like she regrets ever opening the door? Thomas's throat tightened. How did you explain to a 12-year-old that she was living collateral damage in a war that started before she was born? How did you tell a child that the woman raising her had chosen vengeance over compassion, and that every day of Rose's life had been an elaborate act of revenge against a man she'd never met? It's complicated, Thomas began, and immediately hated himself for the cowardice of that word. Complicated. As if that explained anything. As if that justified 12 years of systematic emotional abuse. I'm not a child anymore, Rose said, and there was an edge to her voice that Thomas had never heard before. Something hard and angry beneath the fear. I know I'm small. I know I look younger than I am. But I'm 12 years old, Thomas. I've been washing clothes and cooking meals and working from sunrise to sunset since I was old enough to hold a bucket. Don't treat me like I can't understand hard things. I've been living hard things my entire life. Thomas looked at her, really looked at her, and saw that she was right. There was nothing childlike about the set of her jaw or the determination in her eyes. Rose had been forced to grow up faster than any child should, raised in an environment where innocence was a luxury she couldn't afford. She deserved the truth. Maybe not all of it, not yet, but enough to understand that she wasn't defective, that she wasn't unlovable, that the problem had never been her at all. Before you were born, Thomas said slowly, choosing each word with care, something terrible happened to our family. My younger brother William died. He was 12 years old. It was an accident, but it was an accident that could have been prevented. And the man responsible, the man whose carelessness led to William's death, he never faced any real consequences. He paid the church for a burial and went back to his life as if nothing had changed, as if he hadn't destroyed our family. Rose's eyes widened. She was quiet, processing, and Thomas could see her mind working, trying to understand how this connected to her. Your mother, Thomas continued, and the word felt strange on his tongue. Aelith had been Rose's mother, but Rose had never known her, had no memory of the desperate young woman who'd died trying to save her. Your mother was that man's daughter. His name was Gregor. When you were just days old, your mother came to our door in the middle of winter. She was dying, and she asked my mother to save you. He watched Rose's face as understanding began to dawn, watched the color drain from her cheeks, watched her hands clench into fists in her lap. She blames me, Rose whispered, for what my grandfather did. She saved me so she could punish me, so she could make me pay for his sins. The words hung in the air between them, terrible in their accuracy. Thomas wanted to deny it, to soften it somehow, but he couldn't. Not anymore. "My mother is broken," he said quietly. Losing William broke something inside her that never healed. And yes, she made a choice the night your mother died. A choice to take you in, to keep you alive, but not to love you. To use you as a way to feel like she had some kind of power over Gregor. "Even though he doesn't even know you exist." Rose stood up abruptly, the hay bale creaking. She wrapped her arms around herself, and Thomas saw she was trembling. Not crying, just shaking with the force of emotions she'd been holding back for 12 years. "So every time she looks at me, she sees him. She sees the man who killed her son. And she hates me for it. She's been hating me my entire life, and I've been trying to make her love me. And it was always impossible because I'm not really me. To her, I'm just a symbol, just a way for her to feel like she's getting revenge." "Rose." Thomas started to stand to reach for her, but she stepped back. "Did you know?" Rose asked, and her voice was cold now, harder than he'd ever heard it. "That night when my mother died, when she decided to keep me, did you know what she was planning? Did you know she was going to use me like this?" Thomas's silence was answer enough. Rose laughed, but it was a terrible sound. Empty, bitter. The laugh of someone who just realized that the person she'd thought was her ally had been watching her destruction for 12 years without really intervening. "You knew. You've always known. And you just let it happen. You gave me extra bread sometimes and taught me to read and pretended that made up for the fact that you were letting her destroy me piece by piece." "I was trying to protect you," Thomas said desperately. "I was trying to make things easier for you, to give you something good in all of this." "You were trying to make yourself feel better," Rose shot back. "You were trying to ease your own guilt while still letting her do whatever she wanted." "You're just as bad as she is, Thomas. Maybe worse. Because at least she's honest about hating me. At least I know where I stand with her. But you? You pretended to care while doing nothing. That's crueler somehow." The words hit Thomas like physical blows. Each one true. Each one deserved. He'd spent 12 years telling himself he was helping, that his small kindnesses mattered, that he was doing the best he could in an impossible situation. But Rose was right. He'd been protecting himself more than her, protecting himself from the discomfort of fully confronting his mother, from the risk of open rebellion, from having to make a real choice between his mother and this child who'd been victimized since birth. The truth, once spoken, changed everything and nothing at all. Rose was still 12 years old, still trapped in a cottage with a woman who hated her, and a man who'd enabled that hatred through cowardice. But now she understood. Now she knew that the hollow ache in her chest, that constant feeling of being fundamentally wrong, had nothing to do with her actual worth and everything to do with a man she'd never met and a boy who'd died before she was born. The knowledge should have freed her. Instead, it felt like a different kind of prison. 3 months had passed since the conversation in the barn, and Rose moved through the cottage like a ghost with teeth. She still did her chores, still kept her head down, but something essential had shifted in her. The desperate hunger for approval was gone, replaced by a cold, watchful wariness. She no longer apologized for existing. She no longer tried to make Brigitte smile. She simply endured, day after day, with the grim determination of someone serving out a sentence. Thomas watched the change with growing dread. He'd thought the truth would help Rose understand that she wasn't defective, but instead it seemed to have hardened something inside her. She barely spoke to him anymore. When their eyes met across the room, hers held an accusation that made his stomach turn. "You knew. You've always known. And you did nothing." Brigitte, for her part, seemed to sense the shift without understanding its source. She'd grown more erratic over the past months, her carefully controlled cruelty giving way to moments of genuine confusion. Sometimes Thomas would catch her watching Rose with an expression that wasn't quite hatred anymore. Something more complicated. Something that looked almost like regret, if regret could be mixed with resentment and a stubborn refusal to admit wrongdoing. It was a Friday evening in late winter When everything came to a head, Thomas had gone to the village to trade goods and returned to find the cottage in chaos. Brigitte stood in the center of the room, her face flushed with rage, holding a piece of cloth that Thomas recognized immediately. It was from Rose's mother's shirt, the one Aelith had wrapped her baby in the night she died. Thomas had kept it hidden in his room, not sure why, just knowing that someday Rose might want something that had belonged to her mother. Rose stood near the fireplace, her back against the wall, her face pale but defiant. Her lip was bleeding. Brigitte had struck her. "What happened?" Thomas demanded, dropping his pack and moving between them. "Tell him," Brigitte said, her voice shaking with fury. "Tell him what you did. Tell him how you went through my things like a thief." "They weren't your things," Rose said, and her voice was steady despite the blood on her chin. "That cloth belonged to my mother, my real mother, the one who died trying to save me. Not you. You're not my mother. You never were. You're just the woman who kept me alive so she could make me suffer." The words hung in the air like smoke. Thomas felt the breath leave his lungs. After 12 years of careful pretense, of maintaining the fiction that Rose was an orphan generously taken in, the truth was finally naked in the room with them. Brigitte's face went white. "How dare you?" she whispered. "After everything I've done, after everything I've sacrificed, I gave you a home, I fed you, I clothed you, I kept you alive when you should have died in the snow like your mother. You gave me nothing," Rose shot back, and there was something fierce and terrible in her voice now. "Everything I have, I've paid for 1,000 times over. Every piece of bread, every threadbare dress, every corner to sleep in. I've paid for it with my blood and my tears and my childhood. You didn't save me out of kindness," Thomas told me. "I know the truth now. You saved me so you could own me, so you could pretend you had power over the man who killed your son. Well, congratulations. You destroyed a child to make yourself feel better. Does it help? Does it fill the hole where William used to?" "B?" Brigitte moved so fast Thomas barely had time to react. She grabbed Rose by the shoulders, shaking her with a violence that shocked them all. "Don't you speak his name," Brigitte hissed. "Don't you dare speak my son's name with that mouth. You're nothing. You're less than nothing. You're the granddaughter of a murderer, and you should be grateful I didn't throw you back into the snow where you belonged." "Mother, stop!" Thomas grabbed Brigitte's arms, trying to pull her away from Rose. "Let her go. You're hurting her." But Brigitte seemed beyond hearing. 12 years of contained rage were spilling out now, raw and unchecked. "I should have let you die," she said, her face inches from Rose's. "That night, when your worthless mother collapsed on my doorstep, I should have closed the door. I should have let winter take you both. But I was weak. I was stupid. I thought keeping you would make me feel better. I thought having something of Gregor's to control would ease the pain. But it didn't. Nothing did. And now I'm stuck with you. Stuck with this constant reminder of everything I lost." Rose's eyes were dry. No tears. Just a terrible cold clarity. "Then let me go," she said quietly. "I'll leave. I'll walk out that door right now and you'll never have to see me again. You can pretend I died 12 years ago like you wanted. You can finally be free of me." For a moment something flickered across Brigitte's face. Relief, maybe, or possibility. Then it was gone, replaced by a different kind of panic. "You can't leave," Brigitte said, and her grip tightened. "You're 12 years old. You have nowhere to go. No one who wants you. You'd die out there." "Better than dying in here," Rose replied. "At least it would be faster." The words seemed to break something in Brigitte. She released Rose so suddenly the girl stumbled backward. Brigitte's hands went to her face, covering her eyes, and Thomas heard a sound he hadn't heard in 12 years. His mother was crying. Not the silent tears of grief she'd shed in private after William died. These were harsh, ugly sobs that shook her entire body. "I tried," Brigitte gasped between sobs. "I tried to hate you. I tried so hard, because hating you was easier than admitting that Gregor had won, that he'd taken my son and faced no consequences, that the world was unjust and random and cruel. If I could hate you, if I could make you pay, then maybe it would mean something. Maybe William's death would mean something." "Rose," stood perfectly still, watching this woman fall apart. Thomas expected to see satisfaction on the girl's face, maybe even triumph. But there was nothing, just emptiness. The look of someone who'd been burned so many times they'd lost the capacity to feel heat. "But I couldn't," Brigitte continued, her voice breaking. "I couldn't hate you enough, because every time I looked at you I saw a child. Just a child who didn't choose her grandfather, who didn't choose any of this. And that made it worse. Because then I was the monster. Then I was the one causing pain for no reason. Then I was no better than Gregor." "You're worse," Rose said flatly. "Gregor was careless. You were deliberate. You chose this. Every single day for 12 years, you chose to make me feel worthless. That's not grief, Brigitte. That's just cruelty." The use of her first name, the refusal to call her mother, was like a slap. Brigitte flinched, her hands dropping from her face. She looked at Rose with red-rimmed eyes, and Thomas saw something he'd never seen before. Shame. Real, genuine shame. "I know," Brigitte whispered. "I know what I've done. I know I can't take it back. I know I've broken something in you that can't be fixed. And I know that makes me exactly what you said, a monster. Worse than the man I blamed for everything." Thomas stood between them, his heart hammering, feeling like he was watching something fundamental collapse. The entire structure of their lives, the carefully maintained fiction, the silent agreements, all of it was crumbling, and he didn't know how to stop it. Wasn't sure he should stop it. Rose moved toward the door, still holding the piece of cloth that had belonged to her mother. "I'm going to sleep in the barn tonight," she said, "and tomorrow I'm leaving. I'll find work somewhere. I'll do whatever I have to do, but I won't stay here anymore. I can't. If I stay, I'll become like you, bitter and broken and poisoned by the past, and I won't let that happen." "Rose, wait," Thomas said desperately. "You can't just leave. Let's talk about this. Let's figure something out." Rose looked at him, and in her eyes was a sadness too deep for words. "There's nothing to figure out, Thomas. This house is poison. She's poison. And you're poison too, because you let this happen. You watched me suffer for 12 years and told yourself you were helping. But you weren't. You were just making yourself feel better while I paid the price." She walked out into the cold. Winter night, the door closing behind her with a finality that echoed in the sudden silence. Thomas and Brigitte stood in the cottage, surrounded by the wreckage of 12 years of calculated revenge, and neither of them knew how to begin piecing together what they'd destroyed. Rose didn't leave the next morning. Not because she'd changed her mind, but because her body betrayed her. Thomas found her in the barn at dawn, curled in the hay, burning with fever. Her lips were cracked and pale, her breathing shallow and rapid. The winter cold, combined with 12 years of chronic malnutrition, had finally caught up with her. Her body, pushed beyond its limits, had simply given up. Thomas carried her back to the cottage, her weight so slight in his arms it made his chest ache. She was 12 years old and felt like a child of 8. All those years of smaller portions, of going hungry when food was scarce, of working herself to exhaustion, it had all accumulated in her bones, leaving her fragile as bird wings. Brigitte stood frozen when Thomas laid Rose on the bed, the good bed, the one that had been William's and then had sat empty for 14 years because Brigitte couldn't bear to see anyone else in it. Rose's eyes were closed, her breath coming in short gasps. Her skin felt like fire under Thomas's palm. "Get water," Thomas ordered, his voice sharp. "And cloths. We need to bring the fever down." Brigitte didn't move. She stared at Rose's still form with an expression Thomas couldn't decipher. Horror, maybe, or recognition, as if she were finally seeing what 12 years of systematic deprivation had done to this child's body. "Mother," Thomas's voice cracked like a whip. "Move!" Brigitte stumbled into action, her hands shaking as she gathered what was needed. They worked in silence, Thomas and Brigitte, sponging Rose's burning skin with cool water, trying to force sips of willow bark tea between her cracked lips. The girl drifted in and out of consciousness. sometimes murmuring words they couldn't understand, sometimes crying out as if in pain. 3 days passed. 3 days of Thomas and Brigitte taking turns sitting beside Rose's bed, watching her struggle for each breath. 3 days of Thomas seeing his mother's carefully constructed walls crumble piece by piece. On the second night, he woke to find Brigitte sitting beside Rose, holding the girl's hand, tears streaming silently down her face. "I didn't mean for this," Brigitte whispered, not looking at Thomas. "I never wanted her to be sick. I never wanted. I just wanted. I don't know what I wanted anymore." Thomas said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like absolution, and Brigitte didn't deserve that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. On the fourth day, Rose's fever broke. She woke in the early morning, confused and disoriented, her eyes focusing slowly on the unfamiliar ceiling above her. Thomas was dozing in the chair beside the bed, and he jerked awake at the sound of her stirring. "Easy," Thomas said softly, reaching for the water cup. "You've been very sick. Don't try to sit up too quickly." Rose's eyes found his, and in them was a weariness that had nothing to do with fever. "I'm still here," she said, her voice hoarse. "I tried to leave and I'm still here." "You collapsed," Thomas explained. "Your body couldn't take it anymore, Rose. You've been pushing yourself too hard for too long." A bitter smile touched Rose's cracked lips. "Pushing myself, is that what we're calling it now?" Before Thomas could respond, Brigitte appeared in the doorway. She'd aged a decade in 4 days, her face gaunt and lined, her hair hanging loose and uncombed. She looked at Rose with an expression so raw, so utterly vulnerable, that Thomas almost looked away. "You're awake," Brigitte said quietly. Rose's face hardened immediately. "Don't. Whatever you're about to say, don't. I don't want your apologies or your excuses or your tears. I just want to get strong. Enough to leave." "I know," Brigitte said, and her voice was steady now, controlled. "I know you do. And I know I have no right to ask anything of you. No right to expect forgiveness or understanding. But I need to tell you something. I need you to know before you go." Rose turned her face toward the wall. "I don't care what you need. Please," Brigitte said, and the word sounded foreign in her mouth. Thomas couldn't remember the last time he'd heard his mother beg for anything. "Just listen." "Then you never have to speak to me again." Rose was silent for a long moment. Then, still facing the wall, she said, "Fine, talk, but make it quick." Brigitte moved closer to the bed, her hands twisted together. "When your mother came to my door 12 years ago, I made a choice. A terrible, selfish choice. I told myself I was saving you, but the truth is, I was trying to save myself. I thought if I could control something, anything, about what happened with Gregor and William, it would make the pain less. It would give me power in a situation where I'd felt completely powerless." She paused, swallowing hard. "But it didn't work. Every day I looked at you, I saw an innocent child, and every day I treated you cruelly anyway. Because admitting you were innocent meant admitting that my pain had no target. That William's death was just random and senseless, and there was no one to blame who would actually suffer consequences. So I made you suffer instead." Rose's shoulders were rigid, her hands fisted in the blanket. "I starved you," Brigitte continued, and her voice was shaking now. "Not enough to kill you, but enough to keep you small. Keep you weak. I gave you the hardest work. I withheld affection. I made you feel worthless. And I told myself it was justice, but it wasn't justice. It was just cruelty. It was just me being too broken to see that hurting you didn't bring William back. It didn't punish Gregor. It just created more pain in a world that already had too much." Thomas watched his mother, saw the tears tracking down her face, and felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't manipulation. This wasn't performance. This was genuine, devastating recognition of what she'd done. But was it enough? Could it ever be enough? "I don't expect you to forgive me," Brigitte said. "I don't forgive myself. But I need you to know that none of this was your fault. You were right. You've always been right. I am a monster." and you deserved so much better than what I gave. You. Rose finally turned her head, looking at Brigitte with eyes that held 12 years of accumulated hurt. Do you know what the worst part was? Rose asked, her voice barely a whisper. It wasn't the hunger or the cold or the work. It was the hope. For years I kept hoping that if I just tried harder, if I was just good enough, you'd finally love me. I kept thinking there was something wrong with me, something broken. And I spent every day trying to fix myself when the problem was never me at all. It was you. You broke me on purpose. You took a baby who had nothing, and you systematically destroyed her spirit because you were too much of a coward to face your own grief. The words landed like physical blows. Brigitte flinched with each one, but she didn't look away. She stood there and took it, absorbing every accusation, every truth. You're right, Brigitte said. Everything you're saying is right. And I know an apology is meaningless. I know saying sorry doesn't undo 12 years of damage. But I am sorry, Rose. I'm sorrier than I have words for. And if there's anything at all I can do to help you heal from what I've done, I'll do it. Rose laughed, but it was a hollow sound. You want to help me heal? Then let me go. Don't try to stop me when I'm strong enough to leave. Don't come looking for me. Just let me disappear and pretend I never existed. That's the only thing you can give me now. Brigitte's face crumpled, but she nodded. If that's what you want, if that's what you need, then yes, I'll let you go. I need to know something first, Rose said, and her voice was stronger now, harder. My grandfather, Gregor, is he still alive? Thomas and Brigitte exchanged glances. Yes, Thomas said carefully. He still lives in the village, still farms the same land. Why? Because I want to meet him, Rose said, and there was something cold and determined in her voice that made Thomas's blood run cold. I want to see the man whose carelessness created all of this. I want to look him in the eye and see if he even remembers what he did. If he even cares that his actions destroyed 3 lives. Rose, I don't think, Thomas began, but Rose cut him off. I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you. When I'm strong enough to walk, I'm going to find Gregor, and then I'm going to decide what happens next. 2 weeks passed before Rose was strong enough to walk the distance to Gregor's farm. 2 weeks of awkward, painful silence in the cottage, where Brigitte moved around Rose like a penitent circling a saint's shrine. She cooked the girl proper meals now, rich broths and fresh bread with butter. She mended Rose's clothes, replacing the threadbare rags with decent fabric. She spoke softly, carefully, as if afraid that any wrong word might shatter what little remained between them. Rose accepted it all with the cold politeness of a stranger accepting charity from someone she'd never see again. She said please and thank you. She ate the food. She wore the clothes, but her eyes remained distant, unfocused, as if she were already gone, even though her body still occupied space in the cottage. Thomas watched them both and felt the weight of his own guilt pressing down until he could barely breathe. He'd enabled this. For 12 years, he'd watched and done nothing of substance. And now, seeing Rose preparing to confront the man whose carelessness had set all of this in motion, he felt a terrible dread settling in his bones. On a gray morning in early spring, Rose announced she was ready. She stood by the door wearing a simple brown dress that actually fit her hair braided neatly. She looked older than 12, or maybe just weathered, like wood that had been left out in too many storms. I'll come with you, Thomas said immediately. No, Rose replied, her voice flat. I need to do this alone. Rose, you don't know what you're going to find there. Gregor is. He's not a kind man. He never was. Good, Rose said. I don't want kind. I want truth. Brigitte stood near the hearth, her hands gripping each other so tightly her knuckles had gone white. He doesn't know about you, she said quietly. He doesn't know Aelith had a baby. He sent her away before anyone could see she was pregnant, before anyone in the village knew. He was ashamed of her. Something flickered across Rose's face. Pain, maybe, or recognition. Her grandfather had been ashamed of her mother the same way Brigitte had been ashamed of her. Shame seemed to be the inheritance passed down through her bloodline. "Then I'll introduce myself," Rose said, and pulled open the door. The walk to Gregor's farm took nearly an hour. Rose moved slowly, her body still recovering, but she moved with purpose. The spring air was cool and damp, carrying the smell of newly turned earth and growing things. Around her, the world was coming back to life after winter's death, but Rose felt none of that renewal in her own chest. Just a cold, determined emptiness. Gregor's farm was larger than she'd expected. Fields stretched out in neat rows. A barn stood solid and well-maintained. Chickens scratched in a tidy yard. This was prosperity. This was the home of a man whose carelessness had killed a child, but who'd faced no real consequences. Who'd continued on, farming and profiting and living as if that child's death had been nothing more than an unfortunate incident. Rose found him in the field, guiding a plow behind a horse. He was older than she'd imagined, maybe 55 or 60, with a thick gray beard and broad shoulders that spoke of decades of manual labor. He looked up as she approached, squinting against the morning sun. "Can I help you, girl?" His voice was gruff but not unkind. Just the voice of a man interrupted in his work. Rose stood at the edge of the field, her hands clasped in front of her. "Are you Gregor?" "I am. What's this about?" "My name is Rose," she said, and watched his face for any flicker of recognition. There was none. The name meant nothing to him. "I'm Alith's daughter." The change in Gregor's expression was immediate. His face went pale, then flushed red. He released the plow and moved toward her with quick, aggressive steps. "Alith's? No, that's not possible. Alith died 12 years ago. Died in disgrace, pregnant and unwed. She had no child. She died before." "No, she died after," Rose said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "She died giving birth to me, or shortly after. I don't know the exact details, but I'm here. I'm real, and I'm your granddaughter." Gregor stared at her, his mouth working soundlessly. Rose saw fear in his eyes, fear of scandal, of shame, of this ghost from his past materializing to ruin his carefully maintained respectability. "Who raised you?" he demanded. "Who knows about this?" "Does it matter?" Rose asked. "I'm here now, and I wanted to meet you. I wanted to see the man whose carelessness killed a 12-year-old boy named William 14 years ago, the boy whose death started everything." Gregor's face hardened. "That was an accident. A tragedy, yes, but an accident. The boy was playing where he shouldn't have been. He was helping you," Rose said, and her voice was sharp now, cutting. "He was retrieving a tool you'd left in the field, and your horse bolted because you didn't secure your fence properly. That's not an accident. That's negligence. Who told you this?" Gregor's voice rose. "Who's been filling your head with lies?" "The woman who raised me," Rose replied. "The boy's mother, Brigitte. She took me in the night my mother died. She saved my life. And then she spent 12 years making me wish she hadn't." The words hung in the air between them. Gregor's expression shifted from anger to confusion to something approaching horror. "Brigitte? William's mother raised you. Why would she? Dear God, what did she do to you?" Rose felt something hot and vicious rise in her throat. This man, this stranger who shared her blood, was the architect of all of it. His carelessness had killed William. His shame had sent Alith away to die. His sins had poisoned her entire existence. "She starved me," Rose said, and her voice was eerily calm. "Not enough to kill me, but enough to keep me weak. She worked me until my hands bled. She withheld affection and kindness and made me believe I was fundamentally worthless. She did all of this because you killed her son and faced no consequences. Because she needed someone to punish, and you were beyond her reach. So she punished me instead. Your granddaughter, an infant who had nothing to do with any of it." Gregor's face had gone gray. He stumbled backward, nearly losing his footing. "I didn't know. I didn't. Alith said she was going to stay with her aunt in the north. She said she'd be taken care of. I gave her money. thought you could pay for your shame and make it disappear, Rose said. Just like you paid the church after. William died and thought that settled things. But shame doesn't disappear, Gregor. It just gets passed down. My mother carried your shame. I've been carrying it my entire life. And Brigitte has been carrying the weight of her son's death with no one to make it right. What do you want from me? Gregor asked, and his voice was shaking now. Money? An apology? What? Rose looked at this man, this grandfather she'd never known, and felt nothing. No connection, no recognition, just emptiness. I don't want anything from you. I just wanted you to know that your actions had consequences beyond what you could see, that your carelessness and your shame created ripples that destroyed lives. My mother's life, my life, William's life, Brigitte's life, Thomas's life, all of it connected back to you and your negligence. I'm sorry, Gregor said, and tears were streaming down his weathered face now. I'm so sorry. For William, for Aelith, for you. I was a coward. I was careless. I don't know how to make this right. You can't, Rose said simply. That's what I came here to understand. There is no making this right. There's no amount of apology or money or regret that undoes what's been done. William is still dead. My mother is still dead. I still spent 12 years being systematically broken by a woman who should have protected me, and you still profited while all of it happened. Some things can't be fixed. They can only be survived. She turned to leave, and Gregor reached out as if to stop her. Wait, please, let me. I have money. I can provide for you. You're my granddaughter, my blood. Let me try to make amends. Rose looked at his outstretched hand with something close to pity. I don't want your blood or your money. I don't want anything from you. I just wanted you to know that you didn't get away with it. Not really. Your carelessness cost you your daughter and your granddaughter. You lost us both. And you'll spend the rest of your life knowing that your actions created suffering you can never undo. That's consequence enough. She walked away from Gregor's farm with her shoulders straight and her head high. Behind her, she heard him calling her name, heard the desperation in his voice. But she didn't turn back. There was nothing behind her worth turning back for. When Rose returned to the cottage, she found Thomas and Brigitte waiting. They both looked at her with questions they were afraid to ask. Rose sat down at the table, suddenly exhausted, and looked at them both. I met him, she said quietly, and I understand now. None of you know how to stop hurting. Gregor doesn't know, Brigitte doesn't know, Thomas doesn't know. You're all so broken by loss and guilt that you've been passing the pain around like some kind of sickness. And I've been the one paying for it. Rose, Brigitte started, but Rose held up her hand. I'm leaving tomorrow, for real this time. And I want you to know that I don't forgive you. I can't. Not yet. Maybe not. Ever. But I understand. That doesn't make what you did right. It doesn't undo the damage. But I understand that hurt people, and you were so hurt you couldn't see past your own pain to recognize mine. She looked at Thomas. And you. You're not innocent in this. Your silence was its own kind of cruelty. But I know you tried. In your own cowardly way, you tried. And I suppose that has to count for something. Brigitte's tears fell silently now, and she made no move to wipe them away. Where will you go? I don't know yet, Rose said. Somewhere far from here. Somewhere I can start over without the weight of everyone else's grief crushing me. Somewhere I can figure out who I am when I'm not defined by being unwanted. You were never unwanted, Brigitte whispered. Not truly. I was just too broken to want anything. Rose stood, her body aching, but her spirit somehow lighter than it had been in years. That's your burden to carry now, not mine. I'm done carrying other people's pain. I'm going to find my own life, my own story, one that doesn't start with someone else's tragedy. And as she walked upstairs to pack what little she had, Rose felt something she'd never felt before in this cottage. Not happiness exactly, but possibility. The fragile, terrifying possibility that somewhere beyond these walls, beyond this poisoned history, there might be a future worth living. Rose walked away from that cottage carrying nothing but the clothes on her back and a truth that weighed more than any possession ever could. Hurt people hurt people. And sometimes the cruelest prisons are built by those who claim to be our saviors. She learned that love given with conditions isn't love at all, and that surviving someone else's grief doesn't make you responsible for healing it. But here's the question that haunts us long after her story ends. What would you have done in Brigitte's place? Could you have opened that door and chosen mercy over vengeance? And if you'd been Rose, would you have found the strength to walk away? Or would you have let that poison seep into your bones until you became just another broken person passing pain to the next generation? This story reminds us that our worst moments don't have to define us, but our choices always have consequences that ripple far beyond what we can see. Gregor's carelessness didn't just kill one boy, it created a cascade of suffering that touched lives he never even knew existed. Brigitte's grief didn't just consume her, it nearly destroyed an innocent child who deserved none of it. And Thomas's silence wasn't neutrality, it was complicity. We like to believe we'd be heroes in these situations, that we'd choose compassion over revenge, courage over cowardice. But the truth is, we're all capable of becoming monsters when pain goes unhealed and anger goes unchecked. The real question isn't whether we'd make better choices than these characters, it's whether we're brave enough to break the cycles of hurt in our own lives before they break someone else. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the weight of your own choices and the pain you might be carrying or passing on, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a like if Rose's courage to walk away inspired you. Subscribe to this channel because stories like these remind us that we're all fighting battles no one else can see, and sometimes understanding that is the first step toward healing. Thank you for listening. Thank you for feeling. And remember, the cycle only breaks when someone is brave enough to say it ends with me.